Good afternoon. If I were to say the word mystic, we would probably think of some guru from the East. And of course, they are mystics by definition. But it turns out the word mystic is used in the Christian vocabulary as well, but not like the unbiblical activities of an Eastern guru that are not related to reality at all. There are such things as Christian mystics. Now, not all of the writings of the mystics through the centuries have been necessarily good biblically based activities. We can think of people who say, well, I had a vision of so-and-so appearing. The church in Europe had lots of mystical kinds of things that they've recorded for the sake of their followers. But that's not the kind of mysticism that is valid. But there is a Christian mysticism that is valid. And I'd like to talk about a Christian mystic from the 17th century. A woman, a French woman by the name of Marie de la Motte Guyon, better known as Madame Guyon. She lived in France from 1648 to 1717. She was imprisoned for her faith from 1695 to 1703. She was really mistreated in prison, terribly. And it was all because of her faith, and I'll describe that faith later. She was a mystic. She wrote a lot of writings that were very popular. In fact, they were so popular that Louis XIV and his administration wanted to do her in. She was finally imprisoned for her writings by the Catholic Church, who viewed her as a heretic. But all her writings were really amazingly biblical in the sense that she, as a mystic, by definition, wanted to experience God in an intimate, personal, inner sort of way. A valid Christian mystic, then, is not an Eastern guru, but somebody who has a deep desire in their soul to connect personally, where there's a warmth in their soul, a joy that cannot be explained, a heightened sense of truth and reality that only comes from acknowledging the presence of the living God in our hearts. This is a Christian mystic. There have been a lot of them. Perhaps you delight and desire to be close to God. Well, let me share one poem from Madame Guyon that reveals some things about her that I think are encouraging. She was imprisoned for her faith and badly mistreated. But here's the poem. It's called Resignation. I'm reading from a book by A.W. Tozer called The Christian Book of Mystical Verse. A little bird, but by the way, this is a writing that she wrote while she's in prison. A little bird I am, shut from the fields of air, and in my cage I sit and sing to him who placed me there. Well pleased a prisoner to be, because my God, it pleases thee. Now remember, she's in prison when she's writing this. Naught have I else to do, I sing the whole day long, and he whom most I love to please doth listen to my song. He caught and bound my wandering wing, but still he bends to hear me sing. Thou hast an ear to hear, a heart to love and bless, and though my notes were e'er so rude, thou wouldst not hear the less, because thou knowest as they fall, that love, sweet love, inspires them all. My cage confines me round, abroad I cannot fly, but though my wing is closely bound, my heart's at liberty, my prison walls cannot control the flight, the freedom of the soul. Oh, it is good to soar, these bolts and bars above, to him whose purpose I adore, whose providence I love, and in thy mighty will to find the joy, the freedom of the mind. That's a short poem by a woman who was grossly mistreated, even by religious authorities, whose faith was solid in a sense, and who was not willing to give up her right not only to enjoy God at a personal level, but to encourage others to seek him as well. So let's look. You know, probably most of us that are listening to this are not in prison. We're not behind steel bars. But life can be like a prison. We can have a job we hate. We don't want to go to work. We have to because of economic need. We may be in a family situation that's overwhelmingly difficult, destructive, mean, and we can't get out of it. We may have all kinds of financial problems that overwhelm us, that burden us down with what appears to be no way to resolve the problem, and we feel like we're imprisoned. We're not free. We can't be at peace. We can't be at rest. We can't find real meaning in life. We can't find out who we really are. We're all in prison at some level. But Guyon, Madame Guyon, is making a statement just like Paul did when he was imprisoned with Silas in a Roman prison. He and Silas were singing hymns to God that really amazed the jailer. This woman, this French gentlewoman, is saying two things that I want to share with you. The first thing is she acknowledges God as sovereign. She's not in prison because she wanted to be there. She's in prison because she was obeying God and teaching things that even the religious authorities disagreed with, though I think were valid. Look what she says. To him who placed me there, well pleased a prisoner to be. How can we who are imprisoned in our own life experiences that can be tremendously frustrating and limiting, how can we say and believe that God has placed us there? Well, that's one of his attributes. He's a God of providence, and he's a sovereign God. He does what pleases him and what is best for us. And this woman expresses that joy. She goes on to say, he caught and bound my wandering wing, but still he bends to hear me sing. She's like a bird whose wing has been clipped. She can't fly. She can't get out of prison. And she acknowledges that God was the author of clipping that wing. She's there because God has allowed her to be there. And she's going to sing in spite of it because she knows her loving, sovereign God has allowed that. And so how are our wings clipped? Well, sometimes we need to be stopped short in our tracks. Sometimes we need this, quotation marks, prison experience to realize that freedom only really comes when our soul is engaged deeply by faith in God. And then she goes on to say, but though my wing is closely bound, God binds her wing. She can't fly away. Sometimes we can't get out of the circumstances we're in that can be painful and frustrating. God's allowing it. Our response should be one of, thank you. It doesn't feel good, but I know you love me. You'll never leave me or forsake me. I know that you're in the business of predestining me to be conformed to the image of Christ. And these so-called prison experiences perhaps are just part of that process by which we learn to turn away from ourselves and the world and flee into your presence. So in prison, she's totally free. She experiences God's freedom, and she's imprisoned. Look at the word that she uses. My prison walls cannot control the flight, the freedom of the soul. Oh, it is good to soar these bolts and bars above, to him whose purpose I adore. Yes, confined to a cell, can't move freely, can't even go out and walk in the courtyard. But she's not confined. Her soul flees from the prison of her circumstances right into the presence of God, that she enjoys a deep level of spiritual fellowship. So let me read a couple of things. These are quotes from her, and leave this thought with you. She says, prayer is the key of perfection and of sovereign happiness. It is the efficacious means of getting rid of all vices and of acquiring all virtues. For the way to become perfect is to live in the presence of God. He tells us this himself. Walk before me and be blameless, God says in Genesis 17:1. Prayer alone can bring you into his presence and keep you there continuously. She says, there was a period when I chose a time and place for prayer, but now I seek that constant prayer and inward stillness known. Prayer to her was the means by which we stay in communion, constant communion with God. Now let me just share one final thought. She was branded as a heretic and punished for it. But listen to her faith. Guyon defended the belief that salvation is the result of grace rather than works. Oh, that would go against the Church of Rome. Like St. Augustine, St. Aquinas, Calvin, and Martin Luther, she thought that a person's deliverance can only come from God as an outside source, never from within the person himself or herself, as a result of his own free will. God bestows his favor as a gift. This woman was theologically sound and punished for it, unfortunately. But here's the upshot of the whole thing. In spite of the injustice of the imprisonment, she learned that she could be close to God and enjoy liberty that can only be found in imprisonment. We disdain and hate our imprisonments, and yet these are gifts from God, she would say, to make it possible for us to desire to flee by prayer into the very presence of the God that loves us. You know, our times are tough. They're difficult today. We feel isolated, and social distancing keeps us from one another. We can't be with our families, can't go to the hospital to visit loved ones, and so on. These are imprisonments of a sort. But nothing prevents us, absolutely nothing prevents us from fleeing into the presence of God for consolation, for succor, for help, comfort. Madame Guyon is really a class example, I think, of a Christian mystic, the good kind of mystic. God bless you.